And welcome back to Cajun Coding. This is St. Raz, and we are still studying Java with the help of Nick Perlante's great site Codingbat. And we're just starting the set of warm-up exercises labeled Warmpup2. Might be moving a little faster, obviously. You can pause or rewind if you need to. Understand this is not the kind of captive audience enthralled to a rigid schedule as you might be with a television or radio program or something like that with more traditional media, so you can jump around as needed. And we're here on string times. Given a string and non-negative int in, return a larger string that is n copies of the original string. So getting started on that, let's go ahead and set up our answer, which is data type string. We'll just call it answer. No reason to get cute with that. And we're going to initialize it as an empty string. Larger string that's n copies of the original string. Sure sounds like we need a for loop, not a for loop, a for loop. And initialize our incrementer. I'm going to set I as less than n, not string length. I less than n, and then increment I and the code block. And all we need to do here is we're going to append. We're going to use plus equals there. So we're going to take answer, whatever answer happens to be at that time, and add something to it, in this case the original string. Then we return our answer. And there it is. Front times, given a string and a non-negative int in, we'll say that the front of the string is the first three characters, or whatever is there if the string is less than length 3. Return n copies of the front. So let's go ahead and set up our answer, which is becoming pretty standard now. Now we return n copies of the front, so we can create another variable, and we'll just call that front. And we can also set that as being empty. Now we need to declare, we need to set front. So if string length is less than 3, we're going to assign to front the value of the string. Can actually do less than 4. Of course, the only other possibility of it being less than 4 is that it's 4 or more. So this is an else. And we set the value of front to the first 3 characters, which would be string, or str rather, substring, and then the first 3 characters. Now that's our front value, whether it's the whole string or just the first 3 characters of a larger string. And we need to return n copies of the front. So our for loop, and I literally put a O instead of a 0. It's a 0, not an O. And I is less than n. We increment by 1 each iteration. And in each iteration, what we'll do is our answer, whatever it happens to be at the time, is going to get 1 more iteration of our front variable. That's all the hard stuff we're doing. Don't forget when you're finishing up a function to return the answer. sometimes you get all the stuff that you're thinking about how to do, then you forget to actually return the response. So we return answer. And that should work. Oh, what happened here? That is interesting. Why is it doing that? String front, string front. Oh, here it is. 0 to 1 should be 0 to 3, no? There we go. I'm not sure why I put 0 to 1, but that works. And let me see. I think they used a slightly different solution here. They initialized frontlen. They initialized it to 3, which means the first 3 characters. But then we have a conditional here. If 3 is greater than the string length, then we set frontlen to the length of the string. And then string front would be equal to the string substring 0 to frontlen, which is short for front length. So it's slightly different. Now their loop is pretty much the same. They don't use the append plus equals. They use result equals result plus front. Both completely correct though. Okay, our next exercise, count XX. Count the number of XX in the given string. Overlapping is allowed, so XXX contains 2 XX. So getting started on this. And obviously, so we're counting how many instances of something. So a simple integer will work, and no need to get fancy with the name. We'll just call it count, int count, and before we start counting, of course, our count is at 0. Now we set up our for loop. Now note, we've been using I is less than string length, str length. Now since we're counting 2 characters here, we're going to use less than string length, str length minus 1. Otherwise we could be looking at some possible out of bounds errors. And now we're going to check to see what we've got. So if str and then substring, it's going to be start at I and then let's go to I plus 2, and then you call the equals method and use the XX. And then if that is true, then we increment count, which we can do with the plus plus, and then we return our count integer. Keep an eye if you're looking at chunks of some substrings, depending on how long they are. If you're going to search through the entire string, keep an eye on this for loop, that middle value in that for loop. You may have to have -1, -4, minus whatever to keep yourself from getting out of bounds errors there. And on to the next exercise, double X. Given a string, pardon me, return true if the first instance of x in the string is immediately followed by another x. And there's a really simple way to do that, which uses a new method. And I believe that we need to do a little checking here. I believe we're going to have a couple of errors, but most of this should run okay. Expected line 2. And string index of. I think that's a single quote. I'm not sure what that's doing there. Oh, here it is. Not sure where I went wrong here. Let me see. String character at equals x. Now, inside that value here, we've got str at index of x this closes that, this parentheses closes this. We have one too many parentheses here. There it is. And those opening and closing parentheses are a problem. This particular IDE, if you click on a line, it will show you where that closing brace or parentheses or bracket, it will highlight the one that opens it. But if you're in the same line, it can get very tricky. So this is what I expected. This index of method is the new one that we've introduced here, index of, and what this does is it returns an integer value, and it's going to return the integer value of the character specified in the parentheses here, and it should be in single quotes. Usually we're dealing with character at or index of a character. It's going to be into single quotes and returns that integer. Now if you take all that, it returns an integer, and then we add 1 to that integer, and then we're checking the character at that address referenced by that integer in the string that we called that method on. And then we check that against equals, which we do use the arithmetic equal comparator for character at, and then single quotes x. So for example, in this, walking through this, we've got an index of is going to be the first character of that type. So it checks left to right. So if we work from inside out, string index of x, the first one shows up at index 1. We add 1 to it, that gives us an integer 2. The character at index 2 in the string str is equal to x. In this case, that is true. The first x is here. The index, the character at the index right after that is not an x, so it's false. True. Now what do we have here? False. That is, which is correct. This is the first failed test. And this test fails. Why? we find the index of the first x occurring, and the index is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The index is 4, but it's the last character. So the index ends up, when we check the index after that, there is none. So we're out of bounds. Same thing here because it's passing us an empty string. And here, same thing, because the x is the end of the string even though it only has one character in it. So we need to check to make sure that that's not placing us out of bounds. So this is one of those edge cases. Oops. This is one of the edge cases, and what we can do is we can use an if statement to make sure that that index is not going to put us, make sure that the index of that character is not the same as the length of the string. So if, let me see, str index of x, and would it be equal? Let me see. For example, so if we have, this is the easiest example here, so there's only one x. Okay, the length is 1, and the index of would be 0. So if index of x is equal to string length minus 1, that statement means that the x, the first x, is the last character of the string, which means that we can't possibly have a character, we don't have a character at all after that, so it can't possibly be a second x. So if that resolves to true, then we return false. And everything works. Now notice this is this isn't a super short if statement. It is completely legal to put that return on the same line, depending on the standards. If you're working in a professional environment, depending on their standards or preferences, they may or may not fuss at you about that. But it's the compiler's not going to complain. Your manager, I can't speak to that. Let's see, we've got another one. How many do we have? Double X. I don't think I'm going to be able to do the whole warm-up thing in one episode, but we can certainly get a couple more. String bits. Given a string, return a new string made of every other character starting with the first, so hello yields HLO. So let's get started on that. We're returning a string. You'll see we're getting a string and we're returning a string. So let's go ahead and declare our answer variable. And of course we're going to use a for loop. Now the string that we're returning, every other character is starting with the first. So we are going to start with 0. And then I is going to be less than string length. Okay, now what do we put here? Every other character starting the first, so we can actually put I plus equals 2. And what this is going to do is it's going to increment our I variable by 2 instead of just the 1 that an I++ would do. There's other ways to do that as well, but that's what we're going to do. So now answer plus equals, and we're going to use the character at str. Oops, I lost focus. Here we go. Str. and we'll use the character at I as it iterates through that. Now, our old friend out of bounds could rear its ugly head. So let's head that off now instead of waiting for errors. And if I is greater than or equal to str length, we're going to break out of the for loop. And now at the end, of course, we return answer. And just looking over the code again, see if I haven't missed anything. I've got my parentheses on the length. I'm actually calling length on an object instead of having the method just dangling out there by itself. I think this will run okay. Yes, no errors there. And of course there's the old joke that a junior developer runs a program and there's no errors. They rejoice that they did everything right. And then the senior developer runs a program and there are no errors, and they give a mild curse and say that they've destroyed error logging. So, but for small exercises like this, I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that I did everything right the first time. So, on to string explosion. What is a string explosion? Given a non-empty string like code, return a string like code. What is it doing here? Okay, well, that's kind of the first part of the problem. We've got to figure out what they're doing. It looks like they're taking the first letter of the input and printing it, and then they're taking the first two and printing it, and then taking the first three until we've gotten all the characters there. So let's go ahead and declare our string, and we've got space, we've got an empty string there, and our old friend the for loop. So what are we doing here? What is the end? So now we've got answer plus equals, but we're not printing the whole string, are we? We're going to append to answer string substring, and what are we putting here? We're adding a substring. Now it looks like we always take the front, and it's the end that's going to change as we put that in. So we're going to take 0, and then we're going to end the substring that we're adding on to I. And then we return our answer. And I did something wrong. What happened here? If we look at our output, we'll see that it looks like everything's a little too short, right? We didn't catch that last character. If we look right here, how high can this go? Okay, if we have string length here, if the string length is only 2 characters, then the highest this can go is to 2. Actually, it's not 2, it's 1. Okay, string length is 2 characters. I has to be less than 2, so it can only go up to 1. Okay, what we can do is, there's 2 ways to fix this. We can do string length plus 1 should work. Okay, or we can handle it from the other side and substring I plus 1, and that also works. When to end your for loop is can be problematic. It's something that comes up quite often. And if we look at their solution, let me see. Each iteration add the substring of the character 0 to I. Okay, they have their substring. They opted for adding to the end of the substring rather than shortening the for loop, or lengthening the for loop. Sorry. Okay, string explosion. I think we've got time for one more. Given a string, LastTwo, return the count of the number of times that a substring length 2 appears in the string, and also as the last 2 characters of the string. So hi xxx hi yields 1. We don't count the end substring. Okay. This actually is not as complicated as it seems. It can look a little intimidating at first, but we take things step by step. One of the most important elements of programming is that you break a complex problem down into simple steps that are handled one by one there. So first things first, we're going to have to return an answer. We're returning a string answer, so let's go ahead and get our string set up. Answer. Okay, and we're going to be counting. Let me see. Actually, that was wrong. They were passing in a string. I was looking at the wrong spot here. It's an integer. The answer is going to be an integer. So I thought it was odd that I was talking about a string and we're also talking about counting. And it's not going to be an empty integer. It's going to be initialized. It's not going to be an empty string. It's going to be 0, which is what our count is before we start counting. Obviously, we have a for loop. Okay, now it says we're not going to count the last 2 characters of the string. I think we're going to go ahead and handle that elsewhere. So we're just going to use length, and it's going to be -1 since we're grabbing chunks of 2 characters there. And of course my attention was on, of course, avoiding our old friend out of bounds error exception. So now once we're inside the for loop, what we're looking for is to see if each chunk of 2 characters is the same as the 2 characters at the very end. Okay, so if str substring I plus 2 equals str substring, and then it would be str length minus 2. Okay, let me see, and this is closing this, and this should close our if conditional, and if that resolves to true, then our answer is going to be incremented by 1. the end of our function will be, after everything else is done, will be returning our answer. And let me see, expected line 4. I missed a parentheses here, I think. Okay. Well, it looks like it's wrong almost all the time. What happened? Looks like it counted twice here. Twice here. It's got 3 here. Now note, we don't count the end substring. So we can do here, if, this is kind of a hacky way to do this. I wonder if we do, let me see, if answer is greater than 0. Oh, it does work. Okay. Okay, basically what I did here was, if the answer is going to be greater than 0, that means that those last 2 characters appear somewhere, somewhere else. Like for example here, we just have the 1 because there's only 2 characters, but if we don't count the last 2, then it would be 0. Same thing here, same thing here. So basically, for any value above 0, then we need to count 1 fewer than that. And that's what this is right here. This is the, I'm not sure what you would call it, it's just the minus equals. But what happens is, this is equivalent to saying answer equals answer minus 1. And it works the same way as the plus equals does. You can also multiply equals or divide equals, and it works mathematically the exact same way. And I think we're coming up time for the end of the video here. And we'll be picking up array count. We haven't done arrays yet. We're going to introduce arrays on the next lesson. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Like, subscribe, recommend this to your friends. If you have any questions, concerns, requests, or comments, go ahead and do so in the comment section. And thanks again for visiting Coding. Bye-bye.